Hello, welcome to my channel. So today we are going to do the autonomic nervous system. So this is our continuation on the nervous system, concentrating on the autonomic one. Okay, so let's start now. So our objectives for today is that at the end of this, you are supposed to briefly describe sympathetic and parasympathetic outflow and its function. You're also supposed to list the differences between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. Then you're also supposed to explain the adrenergic and cholinergic receptors. Okay, so those are some of the things you have to know. Then again, let's do our recap first. So the nervous system, we're learning about the nervous systems. We did the central nervous system. We also did the peripheral nervous system. Where we talk about the motor, the spinal and the cranial nerves. We're talking about the motor and the different divisions. Then today we are just going to concentrate more on the uh, one of the motor divisions, but here we are going to concentrate the autonomic nervous system. But of course, under the autonomic nervous system, again we are going to concentrate more on the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system. So the sympathetic system, or is also known as the thoracolumbar outflow, whilst the parasympathetic is the craniosacral outflow. Okay. So let's do a recap with our spinal nerves. So if you remember correctly, we said the human spinal column is made up of the three bones. So you have seven cervical regions, you have the 12 thoracic region, you have five lumbar region, the five sacral region, and the four coccygeal regions. And the coccygeal region, of course, depends again on the human body because there are some that change, but the range is 3 to 5. So that's the coccygeal region. And there are 31 pairs of the spinal nerves. So there are 8 cervical spinal nerves. You have the 12 thoracic spinal nerves. You have the 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. So these are the spinal nerves. Okay, so that's about the spinal nerves. Most of the nerves of the peripheral nervous system are composed of sensory nerve fibers conveying afferent impulses from the sensory end organs to the brain, and motor nerve fibers conveying efferent impulses from the brain through the spinal cord to the effector organs. Okay, so this is about the peripheral nervous system. And remember, we already did the subdivisions where you know that when we say autonomic, we're talking about things that are of the involuntary. Then let's also just talk about the somatic. So the somatic nervous system, or SNS, or the voluntary nervous system, is the part of the peripheral nervous system, and the somatic nervous system includes both the sensory, which is the afferent nerves, and the motor, which are the efferent nerves, the motor neurons. Then the sensory neurons convey input from receptors for somatic senses, tactile, thermal, pain, and proprioceptive sensations, and from receptors for the spatial senses. You also have sight, hearing, taste, smell, and equilibrium. That's the somatic. Okay, then the autonomic nervous system is involved in a complex reflex activities which depend on the sensory input, the brain or spinal cord, and on motor input output. Then the majority of the organs of the body are supplied by both sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves, which have opposite effects that are finely balanced to ensure that the optimum functioning of the organ. Okay, so that's about the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system, or ANS, is a complex set of neurons that mediates the internal homeostasis. So this one is involuntary. So internal homeostasis without conscious intervention or voluntary control. So you remember we said the somatic is voluntary, whilst the autonomic is involuntary. Okay, so the autonomic nervous system maintains blood pressure, regulates the rate of breathing, influences digestion, urination, and modulates the sexual arousal. Then there are two main branches of the autonomic nervous system. We have the sympathetic nervous system, and lastly the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, and you also have to know that the effect of the autonomic control are rapid and essential for homeostasis. So the sympathetic nervous system, otherwise known as the thoracolumbar system, as of course the sympathetic stimulation that prepares the body to deal with exciting and stressful situations. For example, strengthening its defenses in danger. The sympathetic stimulation mobilizes the body for fight or flight. Then the neurons convey impulses from their origin in the hypothalamus, reticular formation, and medulla oblongata to effect organs and tissues. Then the first neuron has its cell body in the brain, and its fiber extend into the spinal cord. Then you have the structure of the sympathetic nerve in terms of divisions. So number one, we have the pathway from the spinal cord to the sympathetic trunk ganglia. You also have organization of the sympathetic trunk ganglia. You also have pathways from the sympathetic trunk ganglia to the visceral. Okay, so this diagram is actually showing the structure of the sympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system. So in terms of the iris muscle, it causes pupil dilatation. Then in terms of the salivary glands, it causes inhibition of secretion. Then in the blood vessels in the heart, it causes vasoconstriction. Then in the heart, it causes the rate and force of contraction. It controls the rate and the force of contraction, which is of course going to be increased. Then when someone is in fight or flight, then the trachea and the bronchi will be in bronchodilation. Then the liver, you find that the glucose conversion is increased. Then the stomach, as we have peristalsis reduced and the sphincters closed. Then the intestines, the peristalsis and tone is decreased, and of course there's also going to be vasoconstriction. Then from the kidneys, there is going to be urine secretion that's going to be decreased. Then from the bladder, the smooth muscle wall is relaxed and the sphincter are closed. Then the sex organs are generally, all of them, there is generally vasoconstriction in the sex organs. So this is what happens during the sympathetic nervous system division when someone is in sympathetic mode. Okay, so let's talk about the parasympathetic. So the parasympathetic nervous system, otherwise called the craniosacral outflow, the parasympathetic stimulation has a tendency to slow down processes except digestion and absorption of food and the functions of the genitourinary systems. Then its general effects is that of a peacemaker, allowing restoration processes to occur quietly and peacefully. Then the cell bodies of the parasympathetic preganglionic neurons are found in the nuclei of the brain. So in terms of the structure of the parasympathetic division, you have the cranial parasympathetic outflow, which consists of the preganglionic axons that extend from the brainstem in 4 cranial nerves. You have the cranial outflow, which has 4 pairs of ganglia and the ganglia associated with the vagus nerve. Then you have the sacral parasympathetic outflow that consists of the preganglionic axons in the anterior roots of the 2nd through 4th sacrospinal nerves. And then this is now the structure of the parasympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system. So in short, what happens is actually just the opposite of the sympathetic. So the iris muscle, of course, the pupils will be constricted. Then salivary glands, the secretions will be increased. Then the heart rate, the rate and the force of contraction is decreased. Then in the trachea and bronchi, there's bronchoconstriction. Then in the liver, the blood vessels are dilated. Then the secretion of bile that is going to be increased. Then in the stomach, there is going to be secretion of gastric juice and peristalsis will be increased. Then in the intestines, digestion and absorption is increased. Then in the kidneys, urine secretion is increased. Then bladder, the muscle of the muscle wall is contracted. Then the sphincters are relaxed. Then the sex organs, it causes in males, there is going to be an erection. Then the female is usually variable. Okay, so that's the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. So that's the opposite of what we are talking about. If you remember, the parasympathetic, we said constriction of the pupils, sympathetic, dilatation of the pupil. So this, you can pause and go through what we are talking about. So EA promotes erection of the genitals, EA promotes ejaculation and vaginal contractions. So that's some of the things that you need to understand about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, like EA stimulation of urination, EA inhibition of urination. Okay, so let's look at the autonomic motor. So each division of the autonomic nervous system has two major neurons, okay, which are the preganglionic and the postganglionic neurons. So let's look at the preganglionic neurons. So in the sympathetic division, which is the thoracolumbar division or thoracolumbar outflow, the preganglionic neurons have their cell bodies in the lateral horns of the gray matter in the 12 thoracic segments, and the first two and sometimes three lumbar segments of the spinal cord. So then in the parasympathetic division, which is the craniosacral division and craniosacral outflow, then the preganglionic neurons have their cell bodies in the nuclei of the 4 cranial nerves in the brainstem, such as cranial nerve number 3, 7, 9, and 10, and also in the lateral gray matter of the 2nd through 4th sacral segments of the spinal cord. Hence the other names. So if they say thoracolumbar, so meaning the nerves pass through the thoracic segments and the lumbar segments. Then for the parasympathetic, meaning they pass through the cranial nerves and the sacral segments. Okay, so that's the namings. Okay, so let's look at the autonomic ganglia. So there are two major groups of the autonomic ganglia. You have sympathetic ganglia and the parasympathetic ganglia. So the sympathetic ganglia are the sites of synapses between sympathetic preganglionic and postganglionic neurons. Then there are two major types of sympathetic ganglia. You have the sympathetic trunk ganglia, also called the vertebral chain ganglia or paravertebral ganglia. You also have the prevertebral ganglia, which is of course a collateral one, and there are 5 types of prevertebral ganglia that are celiac ganglia, superior mesenteric ganglia, inferior mesenteric ganglia, aortorenal ganglia, and the renal ganglia. Okay, then we go to the parasympathetic ganglia. So the parasympathetic ganglia has the preganglionic axons of the autonomic division synapse with the postganglionic neurons in terminal, or specifically the intramural terminal ganglia. Then they are the ciliary ganglia, the pterygopalatine ganglion, submandibular ganglion, and the otic ganglion. Okay, so that's the preganglionic. Then the postganglionic neurons. So once axons of the sympathetic preganglionic neurons pass to the sympathetic trunk ganglia. they may connect with post-ganglionic neurons. So a single sympathetic preganglionic fiber has many axon, collaterals, or branches and may synapse with 20 or more postganglionic neurons. Okay, then axons of the preganglionic neurons of the parasympathetic divisions pass to the terminal ganglia near or within a visceral effector. Then in the ganglion, the presynaptic neuron usually synapses with only four or five postsynaptic neurons, all of which supply a single visceral effector, allowing sympathetic responses to be localized to a single. So that's the end of the pre and postganglionic ganglia. Then let's look at the autonomic. So the autonomic nervous system, neurotransmitters and receptors. So in the autonomic nervous system, you have the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. So in the parasympathetic, the receptors that are found, we have the nicotinic cholinergic receptors. You also have the muscarinic cholinergic receptors. So the receptor subtypes of the nicotinic cholinergic receptors, we have the NN and NM. Whilst the muscarinic cholinergic receptors, you have the M1 to M5 receptor subtypes. Then in the sympathetic nervous system, you have the alpha adrenergic receptor and the beta adrenergic receptors. Then the alpha adrenergic receptors are subtypes alpha 1, alpha 2. Then for the beta adrenergic receptors, we have the beta 1 to beta 3. So these are the sympathetic nervous system neurotransmitters and the parasympathetic nervous system neurotransmitters. Okay, so about the autonomic nervous system. Then you also need to know the comparisons of the somatic and the autonomic motor. So these are the comparisons. So here we talk about in terms of voluntary. So the voluntary effectors in the somatic nervous system are the striated muscles, whilst the involuntary effectors here are the smooth and the cardiac muscles as well as glands. Then here in the somatic, you find a single motor neuron from the spinal cord to target organ. In the autonomic one, we have usually two neurons with synapse ganglia between from the spinal cord to the target organ. Then the neurotransmitters in the somatic nervous system is always stimulatory, whilst autonomic nervous system neurotransmitter stimulatory or inhibitory. So meaning the neurotransmitter in the autonomic nervous system can either be stimulatory or inhibitory. Then in the somatic nervous system, acetylcholine, which is ACH, is released at the synapse. Whilst so acetylcholine and the NE are neurotransmitters, so the S and NE are released at synapses. Okay. And then in the somatic nervous system, there is no firing at rest. Then in the autonomic, there is a baseline firing which speeds up when stimulated. Then the somatic, the effector is at rest. The effector at rest is flaccid, whilst the autonomic nervous system, the effector at rest has intrinsic tone. So these are the comparison of the somatic and the autonomic nervous system. Okay. So we are now done with the lecture, and if you have not subscribed, subscribe and the bell notification, and also check out other videos. And thank you for watching. And this concludes our autonomic nervous system lecture. And make sure you actually revise the differences between the autonomic and the somatic. At least you have to know the differences and also what happens in parasympathetic. And also, if you are interested, you can also check out the organophosphate poisoning lectures, so that at least you understand the effects of toxins and other nerve agents, how they affect the parasympathetic, or how they affect the autonomic nervous system. Alright, see you on the next tutorial.